Welcome, everyone. This week on Around the Coin, we covered a few different topics. We started with the F8 conference, went over some highlights, reviews, predictions, and where Facebook could be going for the future, as well as their interesting drone project. We next talked about Brian's joining the Brett King podcast. Brett King is a very well-known, I think has the largest podcast and payments in the world, and Brian was on the show. We had Brett King on previously on Around the Coin. So I talked about his conversation there, which focused around credit card fraud on Apple Pay and some of the misconstrued press articles around Apple Pay. Interesting. And the interesting transition there was on Brett's show, Charlie Shrem is a founder of a company called BitInstant. And Charlie was recently, actually tomorrow, he is going to jail for 2 years. Charlie has an amazing story of kind of being prosecuted or convicted as a, not targeted, but unfortunate repercussion of his company facilitating a transaction to marijuana or drugs in the $1 million to $2 million range. Interesting perspective. We get into more about that on the show, and there's a fantastic article about Charlie online. The SEC ruling on crowdfunding going from $5 million to $50 million is absolutely huge, so we talked about the effects that that'll have. We also touched on payday lending restrictions, the changes that happen in the industry, and how it'll affect, frankly, everyone. The payday limitations or the interest and fees over $80 billion last year, a lot of that's going to be fixed for the industry. So talked about the effects on that. And as always, if you have any questions, comments, concerns, issues you'd like us to bring up, or if you'd like to donate to the show, we appreciate all those. We're the easiest guys in the world to get a hold of. So look forward and hope you enjoy. All right, everyone, welcome to Around the Coin. We have Brian, Faisal, myself today. Exciting week, as always, as Facebook wraps up their F8 conference with a lot of emerging products, but notably the sort of platform that they're creating around Messenger. So we'll be diving into that as well as a few other topics. Brian, Faisal, how are you guys doing today?
Wonderful.
Doing good. Faisal, before the show was a little questioning on his voice, but we convinced him. I think he sounds great for today. So, Faisal, we're glad to have you on.
Otherwise known as Barry White for today.
Yeah, tail end of the flu.
Yeah. Cool. So we can jump right in. We have F8. Brian, or Faisal, either one. What were the takeaways from F8?
Well, I think I can just sum it up very simply. This is not just about Facebook being a social media platform. This is about Facebook extending out like they've never extended out before. I mean, in many ways, they are equating themselves to be as equally cool and great and diversified as, say, Google, I'm not sure what Brian would think about that, but that's the gist of it that I got it. It's much more than just a Facebook, that us as traditionally as.
And you can see that with some of their products. I mean, particularly around the virtual reality or acquiring, boy, I'm drawing a blank here on
WhatsApp, Instagram,
Oculus, yeah. I mean, acquiring Oculus is a clear shift in the company's direction to do something completely outside of the realm of the traditional, book face, right? They're just
well, I think the big focus was on the Internet of Things, right? Mm-hmm. So it's much more than just saying, "Hey, listen, we are all about an app on the Internet or the web where you can like photographs and that's it." I think they're showing the world it's much more than just apps. Don't be surprised if Facebook comes and makes your next light switch. That's control on the internet. Don't be surprised if we beam internet down from 90,000 feet.
And do you think Facebook's in the realm of sticking to the commonality or the theme of connecting people, or Google will say their overarching mission is to aggregate data and make it usable for the world, right? And they can kind of justify a lot of projects within that based on that sort of overarching broad vision. Is Facebook going to stick to the commonality of connecting people being their primary?
Well, that's such a huge umbrella, connecting people. Everything comes under it, right? I mean, one of the things that Facebook walked away from this conference was to let people know that, we are more than just, contributing than the social media timeline that you see on your internet. We're all about making smart data centers. We're all about improving the coding and the languages that you program with. All open source, all things like the Open Compute project and the from thermostats to batteries, everything. They're into everything now. He says whatever we use and we utilize, we are contributing that as an open source community, to the world. And that and the statement that connecting everyone, like Nokia used to have the quote unquote connecting people. I think that's what Facebook is all about, connecting people, things, events, everyone. So it's a pretty big statement by them as well.
Yeah, it sure is.
I got to say that the whole idea of a platform has probably been around for a long time within Facebook, because it just looks like it was one of the early missions when the company was, getting its momentum. And it really is the combination of a lot of ideas, a lot of thoughts. I think everybody was sort of taken aback when they separated Messenger from, the actual Facebook app. And they figured, well, that was just an echo of how messaging is taking place in other parts of the world. But really, it was a much deeper, more profound thought. They were looking at what is this all going to play out to, and where is everybody residing at most of the time? And the people I know that use Facebook regularly, as it stands today, that app is open 24/7. It is a form. It's like the cell phone. It's like a form of instant communication. So now the question is, when you're inside that app long enough, what are the other things that you're going to be doing with it? And Faisal and yourself, Mike, brought out, we're now in this kind of realm where it can extend out to anything. It can really extend out to any type of communication.
Brian, do you think that they kind of stumbled on that? I mean, I remember when Facebook released their chat heads on the app, where you can click on someone's face and chat with them in Facebook. And I think almost you could sell me on the story that product failed. So then they realized, okay, we have to create a whole new messaging app. And then, boy, if we create a whole new messaging app, that's going to be annoying for users. So let's build on top of that and make it a platform. Do you think it was really a overarching long-term mission, or is kind of they stumbled on it by failing with another product?
I think combination of both. I think you have these ideas, they get whiteboarded, and maybe get forgotten about. I think they started talking about this fairly early. I think the reason why David Marcus is over there is because somebody had that conversation, and everybody would say, well, why would he take such a position? Well, of course it's about payments, but it's also the idea of creating almost an Android, maybe a mini Google inside of Facebook. This platform supersedes any of the underlying operating system. It almost makes the operating system irrelevant. It makes Facebook more relevant, and it's a shot across everybody in the tech space. I mean, at this point, in a way, platforms will, and I think Faisal brought this up just about this time last year, the idea that apps will not really live on your phone anymore. It'll just be, a sort of an app in the cloud. And this is the beginning stages of that in many ways. Yeah,
I mean, just to think of the concept of you having to download a piece of software onto your native phone to be able to use it, it kind of, we take it for granted now, but I think that won't exist in the future, right? If you think about your computer,
makes no sense.
You don't need to download every different. You don't need to download Facebook application to use it.
You just would have a connector, that's it.
Yeah.
They would know how to connect back to Facebook and then connect to whatever app you wanted to use within the Facebook umbrella.
I mean, if you look at what rich media is being streamed, like HD video, and the amount of throughput necessary to make that happen, why not do that with an app? Why not just make the entire experience essentially in the cloud? And when that happens, it changes the whole scenario for companies like Google and Apple. I mean, then at that point, how do you stay in front of it? If the underlying app that somebody is living in all the time is the space that they inhabit, then they become almost like the dumb pipes that the telecoms were a generation before, right? The operating system and the entire user experience is just kind of a given, and then the app that you get is the more value. So it's an interesting time and a big big step forward for Facebook.
Yeah, I think both. I was just going to say on top of that, both Facebook and Google both realized that their initial core value propositions, Facebook and search, and Facebook Google and search and Facebook and the connection platform for people to see pictures and status updates. Those things are going to start to erode in terms of their overall value. Right? Google admitted that search is not even going to be their main driver of growth and revenue in 5-10 years. So they broaden out, I think, out of disparity or realizing that that's the only option they have for long-term success.
Well, Mike, you have to think that when you cross numbers like 200 million, let's say a couple of years back, and then they went to 300, then to 500 million, they must be thinking, okay, where is this going, Tomorrow, with such projected growth, we'll hit 1.2. There are 1.4 billion people on Facebook. They have a responsibility, perhaps as a technology company, to venture out into other areas, to forge more, to do more than just saying, it's all about picture liking and, friendship requests coming on Facebook or, chatting with each other. It has to do with much more than that. And I think that's where perhaps, more advisors or visionaries were brought onto the firm and said, this is what we think we should do. Because when you cross a number like 1 billion, I think there is an added responsibility, whether you admit to it or not.
There's no doubt. How do you feel about Facebook's internet access in developing countries, Faisal? How do you see that?
Well, it's not just about developing countries. It's just about those areas where the ability to place internet is so expensive on a per house basis that it just doesn't make sense that the commercial entities like telcos and cable providers don't extend there. And that's those gray areas or blackout areas is what Facebook would like to go. And I think it's a very ambitious thing, having a solar powered drone in the air for 90 days, what have you. And
have you seen the size of this thing?
Yeah, wow.
It's bigger than
isn't that
fantastic?
A Boeing. I mean, the thing is just immense. And very ambitious.
60 to 90,000 feet, which is way above the commercial airline, height. So pretty impressive, pretty darn impressive. And they keep saying it again and again and again that this is, the next 10 years, the next 10 years. So I think the next 10 years are going to be fantastic. And I think one of the things that Facebook is also addressing, which was a side thought, is, they'll be looking at how talent can be now acquired in the US, especially with respect to the H-1B limitation and so forth. Because if they're building what they're proposing to build, they need a whole lot of new engineering talent, which may or may not be available in the US right now. So many, so many avenues have opened up just by this conference alone. It's absolutely fascinating,
I know, right? Just gets you to think that it's amazing that the Facebook and Googles of the world have a bottleneck of acquiring new people to the internet as their limited growth. Yeah,
I mean, it's not the Facebook you and I grew up with. I guess that's the easy way to say it, right? Hey, this is not the Facebook, not your dad's Facebook. There you go. So this is much more. This is Facebook as a engineering giant, as a technological giant, one with the amazing foresight about the future and how they can do things where other countries even dare not even try to do.
Okay, here's a question. You're a telecom, right? You're a small regional telecom provider, whether cellular or even landline, and you have 5 or 6 of these Facebook drones up there. How's this going to change the entire infrastructure of what we call cellular? I mean, basically, those days are over. You would have a Facebook phone, right?
Yeah, isn't everything Wi-Fi now? Isn't everything? I mean, one of the first things that I see people doing when they land at an airport. Is they don't buy that SIM anymore. They'll buy it maybe, but what they really want to do is where can they get Wi-Fi from? Because once they get that Wi-Fi, they have access to Skype, they have access to Viber, et cetera, et cetera. So I think isn't everything going the TCP/IP route anyways?
So look at it. So look at this. You make a great point. So here we have Facebook with drones in the sky, and we have WhatsApp, right? And I mean, essentially, we are completely bypassing local cellular infrastructure. Now, the question is, what's the sovereignty about having one of these 90,000 feet above your country? I mean, are going to start dropping these drones because the local telecom providers are being disrupted? I mean, this is interesting times here.
I think they'll figure it out. I mean, some countries might oppose to it. which could be in hindsight a bad decision. But I think overall they'll manage. I think they'll manage.
Yeah, absolutely. What do you think, Mike? Would you be a Facebook drone supporter?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm a supporter of anything that brings more internet to the people, right? I think Facebook and Google particularly, or, and other companies as well, but there's a short list of those who are both have enough funding, enough just clout to be able to do projects like this. And if they don't now, I just question whether we're going to see sort of the rush to the moon effect, right? Where everyone's all about bringing internet to the world, and then, we try it, and then we do it a little bit, and then we stop, right? It's amazing to me that, we went, it's in terms of space exploration, that we did these things with the emotional excitement of the world, then we stopped. I'd hate to see a similar thing happen here where, Facebook releases the drones and Google's the balloons, and we bring some internet, but it doesn't quite work out.
Yeah.
So I'm a full believer in getting to a sustainable
But that's okay, I even if that happens, that's okay, because I'm sure from all these experiments, something else would come up, something else would prop up. The need for connectivity is universal. It's the common denominator, and it's what's needed more than ever. I mean, no one I asked people in the US, are you happy with your internet? I was surprised that over 2/3 of the people I talked to said no.
Yeah.
And I was like, really? I mean, what's your upload download speed? Oh, well, I have 50 megs download and 30 megs upload, but it sucks. And I felt like
theoretical.
but I felt like telling them what the position in India is, or in Nepal, or in in a remote one of those seaside resorts in Thailand. It's pretty bad. You don't get 1 megabit even, So when you have 30 and 40 megs and you're saying it sucks, something is seriously wrong here.
Yeah, and it's all relative, right?
Yeah, so the question is, so we got all this internet connectivity, and we got Facebook as the landlord, in my ever famous analogy here, and we now have cross-border payments. Now, let's kind of do a thought experiment, Einstein thought experiment. We now have these free Facebook phones being given to the rest of the world that really doesn't have access. I mean, when you look at the statistics, more than 1/2 of the world does not have internet access on any successful level. And a big value of that don't have any sort of cell phone or feature phone even. So imagine Facebook essentially balloon dropping these, I'm being ironic, but dropping these phones into the hands of all these people with an underlying payment system built into it. What does the world look like that? Let's assume the politics of the banking laws and KYC is all worked out. I mean, you're talking about a very powerful weave into the infrastructure of people's lives, moving money and moving communication. Make sense?
It does. It totally. And here's the best part. In the early 1990s, there used to be this commercial by AT&T. Have you ever opened a door with your phone?
Oh, yeah.
It was Tom Selleck's voice, and he used to say, yeah, you will, and the company that will bring it to you is AT&T, And I revisited all those ads. I think there were about 7 of them.
Oh, you got to do a retrospective on Quora on that. That's
and almost everything is true today. Everything. Well,
You remember Iridium? Remember that?
I remember it very well.
Yeah. That was going to solve everybody's communication problems, right?
But even if it didn't, I mean, the thing is, right now, what Facebook has, in hindsight, it's very easy to say this, but I applaud the management for thinking it through. They have a platform where everyone resides. It's not like Google. I don't reside on a Google platform. I use it every now and then, but I reside on a Facebook platform. And they're saying, all these pictures that you're doing, this is so yesterday. 90% of all internet traffic they predict will be 90% will be video.
Really?
Wow.
And then they said it'll be immersive video. The ability, 10 years ago, Skype was, Skype. If you said that I want to Skype you for a business purpose, many people sort of looked down upon you and said, you want to Skype? You can't pick up the phone and call me?
Right.
Today, we don't think about that anymore. If you have a Skype, and even if you have a funny ID like mine, which is Babushka99, it doesn't matter. People will add you. People will talk to you. But the video feature on Skype is, getting there. Facebook is already thinking 10 years ahead. How can I make that experience so naturally and normal for everyone else?
Faisal, are you talking Oculus Rift here? I mean, we're talking about that really immersive 3D kind
absolutely.
of video?
Yeah,
Wow.
why not? And imagine being able to pull $10 out from my wallet virtually and just hand it over to you. I don't think so that's far-fetched. I don't think so it's far-fetched at all.
And again, you had Second Life and other virtual worlds that were the precursors to this. Money was flowing relatively freely in that world. And here we are moving into the real world. But now you can kind of see all the pieces fall into place with the thesis that you just presented there about, immersive video on why they acquired that technology in that company, because if that is true. In fact,
I think Facebook made it very clear in the F8 opening conference, 3 problems: internet connectivity, human interfaces, and, the 3D world, the immersiveness, that's coming. That's the way to look at it.
What do you say, Mike? Would you be walking around with Oculus on, interacting with the 3D world?
I think Oculus right now is at a stage where it proves the concept, but the even going to the launch conference a couple weeks ago up in San Francisco, you could try the Oculus, and they have basically what they'll do is they'll have HD GoPros, so they have 10 or 12 GoPros strapped around in a revolving structure, right? So when you put on the Oculus, you can see as if you were looking at all of these together. And I think in speaking to one of the developers there, he said, look, we're proving the concepts now. We're just not at use case. We're not at the point where you're going to put it on and use it in a day-to-day function. There'll be early cases maybe in video games, but I think until it becomes small enough, high def enough, I think the quality is there. But it still hasn't reached that point of, I need one little camera with a 3D or a 360 view lens of the world. And I think that's when it really starts to open up. Yeah, right? Faisal makes a great point.
You don't want glass holes walking about with an Oculus.
No, it really doesn't fit in our lives, right? It's like, you know what it is? It reminds me of when cell phones were first invented, and you picture the car phone with the guy with the huge phone, and he's holding it with 2 hands, right? That's kind of where we are.
Phone.
Yeah, right. That's where we are. And eventually it'll become super small and slick and tux activated and everything else. But when that happens, I think the doors will really open up. And who knows? I would bet by that time Apple's going to get in the business and do something really cool, right?
Every time I see Oculus, it just reminds me of the Lawnmower Man. I don't know if you ever saw that movie.
Yeah.
Stephen King. This is all about the Lawnmower Man coming back to life. Mm-hmm. If you haven't seen it, just go see it.
Yeah, it's a great analogy, and it does feel that way, And the thing about all new technology, there's a lot of dead ends to it, but it informs what the future is going to bring. And, there's a lot of deniers about 3D technology, but, if you're using it to communicate with somebody at a remote distance, why not immerse yourself in their world? Why not share that experience? It's not too far-fetched and, sharing pictures.
Dude, you
could sharing text.
Look at what's happening right now with Periscope and Meerkat, right? These are kind of examples of that exact same thing happening.
Isn't it awesome?
Yeah, right. I mean, these are like little glimpses into what people respond to. I mean, it's really cool. So I think Oculus is going to run it.
People are hungry for video.
You know what's funny is a lot of my tech investor VC friends were very annoyed by Meerkat. They just, this isn't, disruptive. And I go, that's right. It is. Well, it's messing up my Twitter feed. And I go, you don't get it. It's not tech people doing this. It's the guy in the street, the gal in the street. They're using it for what they want to use it for. And you may not find it interesting, but they do. And they're going to drive the sales. Whether or not Periscope or Meerkat makes it, I mean, it's the beginnings of this live feed that people are going to have. I mean, a lot of my friends have been for years telling me we'll all have live feeds and we'll situationally let people tap into it at any moment. And I kind of saw that with Google Glass a little bit, but it's kind of coming to that right now. I mean, you don't really need to wear glass to get that kind of effect.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's interesting, the slight nuances of the experience, how they change it, right? Skype and Google Hangouts are sort of a synchronous conversation. You have to engage, and then you have the live video interaction. Meerkat's a one-way display, right? They have text in there, and Periscope has text, but it's essentially broadcasting it on demand. And then you have Snapchat, which is the same interaction. It's displaying it one way, but there's no return interaction.
No feedback.
It's slight differences in the experience, but boy, it's just such a huge effect on the user base. Why don't we change topics? Go on to Brian. You were on Brett King's famous podcast recently. Do you want to touch on what the experience was like there?
Absolutely honored to be on the show. Brett is a personal hero of mine. I've been reading his early bank books, and they were really, really cutting edge. A lot of bankers I knew feared him because he would have a very direct, honest delivery about how technology is going to disrupt the entire financial infrastructure. And he's so articulate, so tapped into all sides of the equation. So when he asked me to come on, I was like, wow, they're going to let me sit at the big boy table here. So,
well, we did have Brett on our show.
Yeah, and Brett was brilliant in our show, but he really maintains this sort of effect amongst his listeners as being just somebody who's moving and driving topics that are sort of cutting edge, apropos to his vision of how banking is changing. So we had a discussion about the shenanigans of Apple Pay card loading. And all I could do was honestly reproduce my information from top 5 banks, top 8 banks, really. I know the risk managers at these banks, various departments of risk. And I asked them, I said, when there was Shireen Abraham, he was a great guy. He put out a blog piece about how card loads were becoming an issue. And, brilliant guy, great writing, but I never saw that type of fraud level that he was, writing about. So I reached out to the bankers and I said, guys, what about, card load fraud? What do you mean? Do you see a lot of it? Well, somebody tries to load a gift card or a wrong card or a little bit of, scam activity, but nothing to write home about. And I said, well, there's a blog piece that this came out. It was literally the day it came out, started reaching out. And he said, that doesn't apply to us. And frankly, I don't even know what bank it would apply to because, Apple gave us the responsibility to take care of our side of the business. And that is they have a platform. We set up how you get into that platform. It's not Apple's province. They give us data from iTunes if the card is loaded from iTunes, but they don't do anything else because they don't know about our customer. We do. And the media took this story as an Apple Pay fraud story and ran with it. New York Times, Wall Street Journal over the last few weeks. And so Brett wanted to kind of clear the air about it. And he did a good show and had some great guys on there. And I presented, and I think we kind of leveled the mindset about how this is taking place. When Apple built Apple Pay, they were across the table and said, okay, bankers, we know nothing about card loads. That's your province. You take over. What do you need from us to make it work? And the banks, being competitive amongst each other, created their own systems. Some were faster and easier for loading. Some required you to call a call center. Some you had to get a text message. Some you had to get an email. Some you had to respond to 2 things to verify a card load into Apple Pay. And obviously, forces of competition cause banks to create different load platforms. If you want to load as many cardholders to the top of the wallet as possible, perhaps you cut it down to one form of verification. So the kernel of what I think is valid in all this is, yes, banks have made decisions on how they're going to load cards into Apple Pay, and they bear the burden of the losses of that particular decision. It's not on the back of the consumer. It's not on the back of Visa and MasterCard even. It's a bank that issued the card, and certainly not on the back of the merchant or Apple. And, there's just great headlines when you say that fraud comes to Apple Pay. And even worse is when it's not delineated correctly about where that fraud is really taking place and who's really responsible and who bears the burden. My final thing I could say is if I'm a banker and the fraud is like some guys were saying 10% of transactions is fraudulent, why are people waiting in line to be Apple Pay banks? I mean, there's thousands of banks that are aboard, some of the smallest credit unions on the planet. You know, a credit union that might have even 5,000 members are now Apple Pay ready with their cards. You know, they can't bear the burden of fraud.
It's almost funny how you interpret this, right? It's almost the reality of the situation is just so much different than what's publicly being displayed.
Yeah, because the narrative is really to try to get as many people to read what you're writing about, right? So some call it clickbait or whatever. And it's also a way to, if you don't like Apple, or if you don't like Apple Pay, or if you have another competing system that you're kind of mad that it's supplanted, then you might want to drive the knife in and turn it a little bit. And a lot of people that I know on both sides of this issue, I know Shireen, who wrote the original piece, is an incredible guy. And I know people who really are on the other side and highly agitated. I know people within Apple who are, I would almost say, viciously angry. I know people inside of banks that are viciously angry. But there's a code of silence in credit card fraud. It's been there since day one. And the code of silence basically is, we do not publicly talk about credit card fraud. No way, no how. Why
is that? Why is that such a big deal?
It was established early on by Visa and MasterCard when they were a non-public entity and they were a member organization. You signed a non-disclosure agreement. In fact, I have a non-disclosure agreement with banks.
Is it part of the effect of they don't want to announce it because the other people will remember or think about it and they're more likely to do it? Just by announcing credit card fraud will increase credit card fraud?
Yeah, all right. So it predates the hacker mentality of trying to open up, opportunities where people have hacked software. The banking codes that most people operate under are from really the 1940s, 1960s, 1970s, especially for the credit card industry. 1970s built a foundation. And when you sign up to market credit card acceptance or to market credit cards, you agreed, especially in the early days, to have a non-disclosure of any type of fraudulent activity. And some of it was not to aid and abet. You don't want to put out something that somebody didn't think about. The other thing was not to create media attention on any of the weaknesses within a credit card system. And I honor that code to a certain level. I won't talk about things that I know people can do and currently probably get around the system by doing. And, there's reasons for that, because the people who need to know about it. And the people within the industry are constantly informing the fraud managers and risk managers. The thing that went wrong about this is it truly is a banking story, how you look at it. Apple cannot dictate to banks what they do with their customers and loading into Apple Pay. And yes, it's an Apple Pay product, but people are mad about Apple extending themselves deeper and deeper into the payment. All right, they're mad at that, but then they get mad at them because they didn't demand bankers do something that's more appropriate. And then totally twist the thing around and say, the bottom line is Apple Pay is an Apple product, and if the experience sucks, it's Apple's fault. The real reality, and there's also this story, which is ridiculous, that Apple only gave banks 30 days to build their platform. There is not even a thread of truth in that. And if any banker were to say that, on record so that Apple would hear it and know who said that, they would be taken out, because Apple had given a massive amount of, because, Apple stuck too. They can't even Tim, when he came out with Apple Watch, I expected something to be said about this. But my insiders are telling me that they really don't want to make it harder on the banks. Now, were there mistakes made? Absolutely. It's a brand new system. Were they prepared? Probably not. Did some banks see 6% of cards during a 30-day period be of questionable nature? Perhaps. I don't know which bank that is. I know that the person that wrote that story feels very strongly. He's got data that suggests that. So I have no province to question that it's not true. But is that true across the board? There is absolutely no way that it's true, that it's even above 1%. And then it really taints the whole image of Apple Pay or can you trust it? And that's really the downside to it, because it's not so much that it's tainting Apple. It's tainting any new technology that any of these creative experts in payments come up with, because what you're doing is you're effectively tainting that hot tub. So anyway, being on that show was just amazing. It was great to have sort of the conversation. There were some technical difficulties, so we didn't have a great debate. But coming on next to me and the group of us was Charlie Shrem. Am I saying that right, Shrem?
It's not Charlie Sheen.
No, my Jersey accent.
Yeah,
Charlie Shrem?
Charlie Shrem. And it was really interesting because I've known his story, but I didn't really know the particulars of the story. And I stayed on and listened, and quite a heartfelt conversation that Brett had with Charlie. Now, I still don't know the exact details, but effectively, it looks like he violated a law retroactively, ex post facto. It was applied. And Faisal, I'm sure you know some background to this. What exactly took place?
Well, he used to run this Bit Instant. It was one of the first exchanges, the very first Bitcoin exchanges. In fact, all the way back, if you go to Money 2020 and 2012, they were the only ones who were having a stall there, a Bitcoin-related stall. So he's been on the cryptocurrency front from the very, very start. And I think it was one of the, so he had the exchanges, he was doing everything as per the law. He didn't have a money transmitter license. It was not required at that time. He even wrote to the regulators, and the regulators wrote back like, what? But anyways, long story short, he closed down his business. The law came out afterwards. He was charged with money laundering under the money transmission and money laundering code, I guess, for one particular transaction, just one client of which he knew about, who bought, I guess illegal drugs or something from Silk Road, and based on that, the state of Florida wanted to make an example out of him and sent him to prison. So he is going to prison tomorrow, which is the 30th of March. I think he has to report by the 1st of April. The 30th of March. Sorry. And what is interesting to note is the law came out after he had closed down his company, all after, and he was charged. The law was sort of extended back to him and saying, well, we're going to charge you with this thing. And he had to take a plea bargain, He could have gotten, 20 years, 30 years in prison. And he took a plea bargain, and he's going to prison for 2 years. Just today, we see that, which is today, meaning the 29th of March, PayPal admitted to, transacting with people on the OFAC list. I mean, that's a big no-no in the industry. If you ever know anything about money transmission, if you're on the OFAC list, you do not transact that. You simply do not transact with them. And PayPal did with a couple of people on that list, and they were fined $7.7 million. No one's going to jail.
So
nothing like that.
What is the difference here? Is it that PayPal is huge and he was small, so he's getting pinpointed on this, where PayPal gets fined?
He is being made and is as an example. I mean, the Attorney General for the state of Florida wanted, just thinking it's an election year or what have you, and wanted to, set himself up. He just went. It's almost like a personal vendetta, going after one small. I think Brett King said it on his show, and I think Brian can tell us the figure. I think it's $800 and some million that HSBC laundered for the drug cartels. I mean, that was the money that was laundered through HSBC.
And admitted, right?
And paid a fine for it. Not one single person went to jail. Not one.
Now, just to be clear on this, was his company facilitating the transaction, right? He wasn't at all participating. He wasn't.
No, he wasn't. And go ahead.
I was just going to say, before the show, Faisal, you mentioned something that this happened, the changes in the regulation happened after the transaction happened. So he's being committed on crimes that he did or they
Well,
weren't crimes
he
at the
was,
time, right?
so his sentence, was struck down, sort of shortened. He admitted he was guilty of aiding and abetting the operation of an unlicensed money transmitter business, and he voluntarily forfeited the $950,000 as part of the deal. Even, he's being made the scapegoat. I mean, it's as simple as that. He's been through a pretty. I mean, he's been under, I believe, a house arrest for 15 months prior to his going to prison tomorrow. He, like I said, one transaction gone wrong. You can read up online about him. There's a lot that's been written about him, and he himself has written, and he has to admit to it now. Because he said, I took the deal. That's it. I'm a felon. He's taking it very bravely. But think about it, huge companies do get involved with money laundering in some manner or the other.
So, Faisal, what do you think would be the lessons to learn here if you're running a company that has to make some of these decisions, right? You're running a Bitcoin exchange or some other payments company where you're making decisions on who to allow, who not to allow. What's the takeaway? Should this scare you and think, boy, we really need to tighten it up? Or is this just another fallen soldier and he's kind of leading the way towards this this better world that we're all building for?
When it's unlicensed, I've always held this view: when in doubt, don't. The VC capital funding, etc., realm of the US is when in doubt, absolutely do it. So I see a lot of companies trying to say, well, it's not legal. Well, how would you know?
Right.
Well, it hasn't been defined, but how would you know? Oh, we'll do it, and when they come after us, well, then would you like another Charlie Shrem episode to happen to you? That's why they all sort of.
Really good point that you make here. The ethos of the technologist is it's better to say I'm sorry than to ask permission. And I've seen this ethos in every element of technology, and it makes a lot of sense for some realms. But the thing I've always said about financial technology is that, unfortunately, if you take that tactic, the downside is that you run the risk of being made example of. I'm a firm believer, a really firm believer, that it is maljustice to take individuals and to make them an example. If anybody were to dig deep enough, you're running into people that have all sorts of desires to try to change technology, but actually what they wind up doing is along the way is really just maybe get themselves into a whole list of hot water. So the question is, what is really served by this other than the ambitions of the individuals that are in the prosecution side? I don't want to say, quote unquote, the government is to blame, because there's really no such thing. What happens is the government is administered by individuals, human beings, normal individuals who have all the frailties and ego problems that anybody else might have, even if they're in public service. And when certain types of lines have been crossed, a lot of people get very territorial, very, very territorial. And especially prosecutors, they'll look at this and say, well, I don't particularly like this guy's attitude. So, my insight here is we're looking at technologists who are making decisions on how they're going to change the world, right? And you look at the ethos that's surrounding most technologists, and that is, it's better to say I'm sorry than to ask permission. Uber is a good example. I mean, they come into an area and they're quote unquote disrupting a particular industry. Not quite disruption. It's really reshaping the industry in a different manner. And, you run into pockets of, resistance. And obviously one could argue that the medallion system of taxi in many cities is, well, it's questionable whether or not that's an open and honest type of environment. Some would argue that there is an unholy alliance between regulators, politicians, and owners that try to keep out external forces. Now, when one looks at this scenario of making example of an individual, I think it's probably the most profoundly wrong way to apply justice. You don't use justice as a marquee or a billboard to impact somebody's life. You do justice in the way that it should be, and that's even-handed and equally distributed. And if there's something to be said publicly as a prosecutor, hey, everybody, look here, this is what you do, this is what happens when you do the bad thing, fine. But if you make the example to be the presiding reason why you're doing things, I think we've turned justice upside down. Now, that doesn't mean that that's not going on every day in courts. If any of us have ever fallen into the system, and I think if we all dig deep enough, we all have family members or remote cousins or relatives that are in the system in some way. In the United States, the odds are that to the 90 percentile, somebody that's been in jail or is in jail. And the United States has probably the highest population per capita of people in prison. And a lot of them are in there for crimes that are not considered violent. And there's a lot of mindset about this is, what is a violent crime and what is a quote unquote white collar crime? And when you use the terminology white collar crime, you're almost making it seem like it's a certain class of individual. No, it doesn't have a class of individual. What you have is individuals that are being labeled that way so that the average person could say, oh, they're the big guys that went to jail. Well, Charlie, I don't know the details of his story, but he's not a white collar criminal. He's a guy that may or may not have broken a law. I don't know. The courts have found that he has.
Well, the thing is, $1 million went through to Silk Road, right? Now that $1 million went through his company to Silk Road. So he was charged with aiding and abetting money laundering of that $1 million, as well as not filing a suspicious activity report, which you have to understand all happened afterwards.
Sure.
At that time, that wasn't available,
God, that's crazy, huh?
Yeah. I mean, and now what was done with that 1 million, we don't know. But the thing that it went through his system and he was not licensed as a money transmitter is what they're getting him for. So it's I mean, he in many ways, it's the same example of what Al Capone, if they want to bring him down, they'll bring him down. Except he was no Al Capone, He was just a dude who knew and loved technology very well.
It feels like God, it feels like there's more. There's got to be more to it, For them to do that to him is just mind blowing.
So I would urge everyone who really wants to hear this from the horse's mouth, and then also sort of compare notes, is to go to Brett King's podcast that came out on what was it, Brian, on the 26th, I believe.
Yes. Yep. And it's up there
on the 26th. And
Radio America.
And breakingbanks.com, and it's the last 20-minute segment. You can hear him directly from the horse's mouth what it was, and then you can obviously go and research everything else. He also has a blog that he maintains. It's not that we are sympathetic with this cause. We all just feel that he was singled out, and that the punishment does not deserve, quote unquote, the crime.
And I think the whole thing is that we're looking at. And even Mike might be able to add to this. I mean, he's building a marketplace and a platform in an industry that is also regulated, perhaps not in the same way that financial industry. I mean, Mike, does it ever concern you that things that you're doing today that just cut the edge of medical services, that one day that somebody won't knock on your door and say you aided and abetted somebody to do something, give an elderly person their pills and they did it the wrong way, et cetera.
Yeah.
Does it ever occur to you, and how do you feel about that?
Yeah, hugely. But I would say there's one huge thing that kind of surprised me about his case, right, is that usually you have, for founders or people in the company, you have the directors and omissions insurance, which usually protects them from things like this. So he can't get filed or singled out and personally prosecuted for this. So we would have that same sort of protection, which surprises me that he wouldn't. So while you do everything you can to follow all the rules, check all the I's and cross your T's, there's always the threat of, oh, what if we do something wrong? How is this going to affect me personally? Obviously, the business would suffer if you make mistakes like that. But I think to pick and choose him, to take him out of a situation like this where it was clearly a business mistake and not an intentional move
Yeah,
to,
a fine would have sufficed,
Exactly. So it doesn't
And also
scare me
all
in the same
after the
time.
fact, anyways.
After the fact, yeah, it's amazing.
Yeah. Anyways, so two other points that we need to talk about is one is the Consumer Finance Protection Bureau released its guidelines as to how new payday loan lending needs to be curtailed and mitigated. Or you guys want to talk about that?
Well, I have not dived into the intimate details of exactly where the changes have been. Well, Faisal, where are you on this? What do you see as a big change?
So it's basically an Obama administration kind of hand me down, and it's saying that if you lend out money, you have to make sure that the borrower can afford to pay it back. But the insane pricing models that they have, interest rates of 400% or more even, all that needs to go. So they're proposing regulations to rein in the short-term payday loans, that have high interest rates, and set a market that payday loan industry has a bad rap. But there are some very good companies out there. We interviewed Sasha Orla from LendUp and so forth. There's Lending Circle and all these things. These are the good companies. But the bad ones who are taking advantage, and I think the regulation is more geared towards them. It's a pretty big industry. It's about $46 billion a year, and and I think it's about time that this regulation came in and sort of separated the bad guys from the good guys and did some sort of monitoring on them.
I agree. And the regulations on the industry has always been administered somewhat on a state by state basis, and I've always been critical of this, and with my contacts in DC, when this summer I had a lot of conversations. We talked about not only payday loans but merchant cash advance loans. They're quite similar in nature. In my view, if you're a sole proprietor and you're operating a business and this is your primary source of income and you're getting a merchant cash advance based upon either an invoice or on your credit card receivables, you should be really facing the same state laws that payday loan companies do. It's no different because you're
it's
giving
overextending, right? I mean, you're overextending. Yeah, so you're overextending a loan to a person or an entity that may not have the financial means to pay it back, and they're sort of stuck in that interest payment loop, and that's what they really want to stop.
Most of the business models that are profoundly bad in both payday loan and merchant cash advance are based on the idea that you really need to re-up to maintain your business and or to maintain your life if it's a payday loan. And the downside to that is, and I've seen it in the merchant industry for almost a decade and a half, is that it sounds somewhat innocuous, right? You're saying, well, we're only giving a percentage of what they transact a month, and they can pay it back anytime. And if they don't pay it back, they're not liable for a merchant cash advance, for example. The thing that nobody really talks about is if they pay it back faster, the effective interest rate could be triple digit. So a merchant could get, say, a merchant cash advance and wind up using it for advertising. Let's just say they doubled their business based on that advertising. Well, if they're taking a percentage of your credit card sales every transaction, and that winds up growing, the effective interest rate or the fixed amount that you pay that company is catastrophically high. Now, in consumer, it's predatory in the sense that we develop a relationship where, in fact, just when you get to the point of getting the next paycheck, you're forever paying into that interest cycle. And it's almost impossible for a certain sector of the community, especially ones that have not been educated in finance and compounding interest, et cetera, to ever get out of it. And so it's good to see leadership coming from this. I could say in some states, it's probably even more strongly regulated. And as you know, Faisal, just knowing the money transmitter licenses, the hoops that one has to jump through, that's why they were established. They weren't established to try to stop, technology companies. They were to try to stop some of the predatory cash advance and predatory money, true money transmitters that were taking place and, sending money to Mexico or to, other parts of the world.
The whole thing is about, putting limits on payday loan lenders. making sure that they don't overextend themselves, or rather don't overextend and burden the person taking the money, because rolling over is going to be limited twice a year for under such rules, the new proposed rules and so forth. So I think it's definitely a step in the right direction, and we'll be learning more as we go along once these rules become more clearer.
Very, very
Absolutely.
true.
And Mike, you're probably interested in this, where we have a change in the rules for how much money a non-accredited investors can put into a startup. What do you think of this new ruling?
Yeah, let me just kind of give you the highlights of what it is. So the SEC announced a change in the regulation that raises the bar, among other things, from 5 million to 50 million in the Regulation A offerings. So this is the money contributed from independent investors. These are not necessarily accredited investors. What they do is, I guess to explain it would be to raise money from multiple people in multiple states typically has taken a lot of regulation barriers. So there's forms, the Form 10K, the Form 10Q, 8K, and other proximity statements that you have to make to investors in different states when they're not accredited to invest in your company. A lot of these forms have essentially killed crowdfunding as it is, or the stance of, or the potential for crowdfunding in different states, which naturally, right, that's kind of the necessary requirement, because it's not going to be all from one state, as well as outside the U.S. In fact, an interesting statistic is in 1998, there were 57 Regulation A offerings, essentially crowdfunding, right, by raising money from multiple people in multiple states, with or without accredited investor status. In 2011, there was only one. So I think the realization was that, look, guys, this bill, this piece of legislative allowance is failing. Regulation A is failing. So while it wasn't new what they did, it was innovative in the sense of how they changed it to make it fit our times. Right now, they split it into two tiers. So they have a 20 million and a 50 million tier. For companies who are raising $48 million, let's say, I think this is going to be an absolute game changer. This is to say, if, say, Spotify wanted to raise $48 million, or Home Hero, for instance, our company, we could go through all the people that we know. Spotify could send a push notification to all their users and say, hey, no matter where you're located, no matter how much money you make, so you don't have to be an accredited investor, would you like to invest, anywhere from $1 to $50 into Spotify and own a piece of Spotify? And that concept is just completely new, and that's made possible by this new law. A couple of the interesting things about it is that it doesn't have a lot of the downsides of publicly raising. So the reason companies go public is for the same benefit of being able to raise money fluidly from people all over the world, all over the country. And they come with certain catches, right? You have the S1, you have to disclose a ton of information about your company. You have to have quarterly reviews where you publicly disclose your incomes and your balance sheets. You have Sarbanes-Oxley, which is a regulation to disclose more information about income of executives. So there's certain cons in going public, right? Virgin as a company went public and then became private again because of a lot of these regulations. So the cool thing is that Regulation A, this new SEC change, brings a lot of the good of going public and IPO, and it doesn't also bring the bad. So it's a pretty good deal for companies who are in that $30 to $50 million funding stage.
How would it have changed your underwriting and funding if, say, this was, let's say, maybe a year ahead, it's already introduced to the public and it's available? Would you have built your company differently? Who would you have reached out to as investors, and how would that have changed your building process to get funded?
Well, it's actually interesting because we, Home Hero, we've raised just under $4 million so far. We've been around for about a year and a half, and we've got great investors with Chamath and Jason Kalkanis and Science involved. But ultimately, what I think the benefit is potentially for us for the future, right? If we wanted to go and raise another round of capital, say $20 million to $30 million, we could do this with this regulation. So not to say that typical VCs and the benchmark Sequoias have anything to worry about. I think there's insane value in the actual people behind the scenes, having those guys on your board and the things that they could do in terms of recruiting, etc. That's going to remain valuable. But I think it opens the door for companies who previously didn't have access to raise the money. They weren't a typical VC company, or being 5 VCs in a firm. A lot of times it's just volume, right? There may be 50 good deals, but only 20 happen. And the unfortunate part is that there may be 1 million people in the country that want to invest in a company, but they can't do it because of regulation barriers. And now companies who want to raise, and there's people out there they can raise from, they could do it. So theoretically, we could go on AngelList. And if you look at AngelList and the syndicates there, it's amazing what they've done. You could go and you could put your company up there. You could publicly raise. To publicly disclose that you're raising funding is a new thing, right? So you can disclose that you're raising $30 million, and people can also contribute to that. So it may affect us in the future, right? Maybe there's a slice. Maybe we raise part from a VC and part from crowdfunding. I think traditionally how I would approach this, Brian, is to say the people who would benefit the most would be the ones who would struggle the most in raising from venture capital. But who knows? Maybe it even turns a little bit where it becomes a more ideal situation to raise from the crowdfunding approach.
Mike, I see this as also a chasm that will be crossed, where you have people who love particular products or services to be able to actively participate as owners of that. And I think we have lost that sort of experience. The public markets have not done so well in the last 15 years for a whole lot of reasons to allow individuals to feel really active in the takeoff of a new company. If you look at tech stocks, it's primarily being controlled by very large blocks of transactions. The individual investor, even in Facebook and Twitter, was quite low in comparison to other epochs. So I almost see it as sort of a endorsement. One of your caregivers, right, coming out within your home hero system, they love what you've done. And they say, well, I can publicly own a piece of this. Yeah. I'm investing my time here. Why not get a return as an investor? I think that's a very powerful endorsement. And it's very much like what the music industry did when it got deconstructed. We would see artists take their YouTube counts and their accounts from free downloads, and we would try to transfer that into a projection of how they would do as a quote unquote labeled artist in distribution models. Investors, larger VCs, can now look at this sort of new crowdfunding or this new non-accredited funding as a endorsement of the future viability of the product, right? If you have 2 million people who have invested their hard-earned cash into your company, how much more valuable of a signal is that than not having those people?
That's such a good point. Because if you look at it, the reason Warren Buffett is so successful is that he goes to all these companies individually and meets with the executive teams, right? But no one else can afford or has the ability to do that. But who else is the key component to assess a company's value and their success? Is the users, right? It's the users, it's the customers, it's the people involved on a ground level.
We're mixing a whole new, chemistry here on how a company will market it itself, right? Because companies in the past would market itself to two different entities, and that would be, quote unquote, the owners, the shareholders. A publicly traded company is beholden only to one thing: profits to shareholders.
Yeah.
Well, there was another line of, you got to make good products so that you can be of service to your customers. Now we're entering into a realm where your customer and your shareholder potentially could be one individual. So now the dialogue, the narrative, the entire production of how you create your company could be tilted in that direction, especially in that crucial startup phase.
Yeah, and
because
I'll say
that's when you're testing, that's when you're building, that's when you're creating, and you're almost getting a vote with a wallet, a vote of confidence saying, I like what you did, that feature is great, here's another $20 I'm throwing. I'm being maybe a future here where people can incrementally invest over time, maybe on an on-demand type of basis. As you see a company grow, maybe you throw, as an individual, $100 in there. Maybe you take all the change that you had for that month, and whether or not you have it in real coin or just as a rounding up, and you throw that into a fund that you've created to support a dozen or so startups. And it sounds like micro miniature, but this is how revolutions start.
Yeah, I mean, those are essentially features on the overall idea, but I think they're huge, but they're going to happen. Yeah, I think if you look at, Brian, one point I was going to make there is you see a lot of startups go to the Bay Area, and one of the benefits of being in the Bay Area that people don't often talk about is if the investors can actually use your product, even with us, people would say, oh, you should go to the Bay Area so investors can actually use Home Hero with their parents and such. That's great, but it also restricts the funding capital to the Bay Area, right? Because now if you have a company who makes, Uber, it's hugely beneficial for them to be in San Francisco first because investors used Uber and they liked it and then they invested. So they actually had firsthand experience, which pushed them to actually invest in the company. But why do you need that, right? You should say, okay, anyone who loves this product, no matter where they live, they should be the ones to determine if it's willing to be invested in.
So let's look at this. You're in Cincinnati, Ohio, and you're a couple of young guys and gals that put together a great idea. Your local community loves it. They wind up giving you a funding round of, say, $2, $3, $4 million, and the thing takes off radically across the non-traditional tech areas. Do you really see that as liberating the entire startup community?
Yeah, absolutely. Because I think it's just more heads in the game. There's not a zero-sum game here. It's just people that wouldn't have otherwise gotten funding or wouldn't have otherwise built that product. Now they are. It's not replacing someone in the Bay Area that's competing for a limited number of dollars. There's an unlimited number of dollars that can go into this. It's just a matter of how do you access it from different sources and how do you sort of make it sustainable and aggregated like Fundable or AngelList does.
And let's get grounded in this. $50 million for a small company is a tremendous amount of money. Not in a Silicon Valley, perspective. I mean, that's like a friend and family's around. But for the rest of the world, it's actually living in reality. $50 million is beyond an IPO for them.
It's a game changer.
Yeah. How about you, Faisal? How do you see this playing out? I mean, you're outside the U.S. I mean, how would you see it as an investor?
I mean, I see this as a wonderful opportunity for anyone to come in, even if not everyone has that, qualifies for the accredited investor, thresholds that they've set. But I'd be really interested to see how this would play out with the likes of Kickstarter, Would they be implementing something where you can go on a fundraising, campaign to raise funds on Kickstarter? That'd be pretty cool. I'd like to see the implications of this, being turned into reality on a Kickstarter campaign. I think that would be the true litmus test, if you will.
Yeah.
Now, what if it was an active market, though? What if it was like you can buy and sell and trade all the time and not their funding rounds, but you're literally on a daily basis making decisions. Do I want to throw $10 in here, $20? You see that as even more of a powerful effect?
I don't know. I think that's where the SEC would come in, perhaps demand more regulation. Because the minute you start, buying and selling and buying and selling, that really comes under the SEC's purview.
Exactly.
Yeah. I think it's not quite that fluid yet.
Yeah, they may have something to say about that, especially the exchanges.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, big time. So we'll keep an eye on it. We'll keep this as a kind of constant, active topic.
Yeah.
As we go through new episodes. But yeah, it's a game changer.
I think we're going to see a startup rise from this that will change the world. We don't even know who they are or where they're from, but perhaps they're not in the Bay Area. Perhaps, just like you said, Mike, they're somewhere around that just found the right combination at the right time.
Yeah. Guys, it's been another fantastic episode. Look forward to having this one up and on to the next one.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Take care and talk next week.
Yep.
Take care, guys.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.